Greetings, adventurous travelers and fellow keepers of the lake. How are you all doing? Lately, I've been thinking about some psychological, perceptual mumbo-jumbo that I think might be interesting to you. I promise this has something to do with mapping the mapless and perception and philosophy and psychology for that matter. I think we are sitting on some interesting subconscious knowledge that, given some thought and research, could really elevate our DMing and our DMing perception onto the next level. So let's roll the intro and jump straight into the rabbit hole. So in one of our games, I'm here narrating a scene and I get all of a sudden like self-conscious and I see that I'm visualizing my players from different angles and different perspectives depending on the situation they're in. That got me thinking about how we are as DMs and as players perceiving the fictional and imaginary world that we're occupying for that session. And I've dug down, I found some books about like mental imagery and some research about how we perceive space. Fun fact, if you look at down or up, you perceive space differently than when you look straight forward. That's something I didn't know. But in the mind's eye, things function a bit differently. You know, when you make a mental picture of a space and it is somehow slightly changing, it is slightly deforming. It's almost as those AI generated videos where things slightly shift. It seems like small changes from the frame to frame, but over the whole video you see totally different images. So I'm asking myself, how do my players perceive things? What is human capacity for detail for that matter? Does imaginary distance between objects make a difference? And how do maps play into all of this? Do maps influence how you're seeing things in your mind's eye? And what is the dissonance between the player and the DM while they're describing? I saw one researcher said that trying to describe something that's in your mind's eye is almost like asking someone to describe the moving shapes of the clouds in the sky. And I think this is something that we as DMs are kind of battling with, so it's worth investigating. And this video, it's not going to be educational in a sense that you are gonna leave with some specific like how-tos. Of course, I'm not going to leave you hanging. I am going to provide some tips and some things that I've learned, but I want to open the topic. I want to start a discussion. I want to really present a rabbit hole that I think is worth digging into. But that's just the beginning. So stay till the end of the video for the tips and for the call to action. So the whole thing went like this. I was running the session and I had side view map in my notebook of the city. I will put it on the screen, and my city, as you can see, it is layered. And the whole time I was describing this to my players, like they were going through the city, in my mind's eye I was looking from the point of view of the map. And that's when I had to consciously remind myself to go back into their point of view, to go back into first person. And this was not something that I want my brain to be doing. I want it to be under control. So I want to propose some exercises for keeping your brain and your mind's eye in check. While we are on the topic of maps, beware of maps, because they can lock you in a certain perspective. And of course, they have their use to influence your spatial perception in the world. Whenever there is a dissonance between what the DM is trying to explain in an imaginary space and what players are perceiving and like their spatial orientation, the map is kind of like synchronizing these two, synchronizing the DM's perception and the player's perception of the imaginary world. I think, and this is not for everyone, but for some people that really want to take control over this system, while you're prepping, it is important for you to try to visualize the place you will be exploring. And I'm not talking about like world maps where you have like very zoomed out pictures, nor like very big city maps, but like maybe neighborhoods or places that you think you should emphasize. Or if you have a city that is small like this, then it kind of makes sense. But I want you to close your eyes and imagine some like crucial landmarks from different angles. And fun fact about angles, when some researchers gave people the assignment of taking like a 3D structure and trying to imagine it in a different angle, what is interesting here is that the time needed for the participants, the subjects, to actually do that task and confirm that they have it like rotated is proportional to the angle that they needed to rotate it with. And a lot of people said that they were using mental imagery for this. And of course, researching things that are tied to your subjective mental imagery is kind of tricky, and there is a whole like history behind that, maybe in a different video. But what is interesting is that some people didn't use mental imagery in that way. They were using it in tandem with their hands, with like the position of their hands. They tried to imagine it as like a miniature and like rotate it using their limbs basically. And this is something that people using like brain implants, for example, are also doing. When you see a guy with a brain implant like typing, usually it is trained on him imagining that he's writing with a hand that is no longer there, or they are incapable of moving it. There are these two approaches to that. When talking about prep, I think you should note down for every location from which angle you want to describe it. I know we are not good at drawing, not all of us, so it is important to at least note down from which perspective you want to look at it so that you have this reminder. Imagine the space, try walking around it, treat it the same way that someone making terrain is treating their terrain. They put like little miniatures on it, they like look at it from different angles, take some photos, like do the same thing with your mental terrain. And when you're walking around your imaginary town square, you start to see it from different angles. Maybe you come up with some new details or something, but you're getting familiar with it in a more intimate level. And when people are asked, for example, to say how many windows they have in their home, this is something that a lot of participants in the study claimed, that they're actually imagining themselves walking around the house and like counting windows one by one. And I think this is borderline more important than having a map. And I think people that are opposed to maps and that are using just theater of the mind for everything do this, maybe not consciously, some probably do it consciously, but we can learn from that. Go around the place, go around the tavern, go around the dungeon. Like as an architect, look at what you've made in your mind's eye, try to visualize these things, and it will become engraved in your longer term memory in that way. Another thing that I find quite interesting is that, for example, if you're describing things happening in a large hall, a boss fight, for example, and you have things happening in one side of the arena, and then you start describing something that's on the other side, that can actually be quite exhausting for the players. There is a research that claims that if you switch focus from two imaginary objects, the amount of effort and time you need to switch focus from the one to the other is proportional to the distance between them. So a chair and a table that are in the same scene right next to each other, it's easy to like switch between them. But if you separate them to the different parts of a big castle hall, then the perception takes more time to adjust to the change of scenery, because it has to render everything that is around the object that is now moved there. I guess these theories break down when you think about like, okay, I can imagine something that is in this room and then imagine something that is in China, of course, but I think there is like a cutoff moment where you're actually materializing two different pictures. You're not moving something that's here to there, and this is the exact problem that I'm trying to understand. Like, how is this all working? How do we perceive things? When does the information become burnt into our heads? You know that when, for example, you go to the store and nothing specifically interesting happens in the real world, you don't remember a lot of that trip. But if something happens during that trip, you might end up remembering that trip for years, maybe your whole life. So there is a threshold where some things are burnt into your mental imagery and are retrieved always in the same way. So I would always say that, for example, when describing a room, some landmarks or some things, they don't need to be interactable landmarks, but you can game the system to your advantage by describing like interactions that have been done with this table, chair, wardrobe, whatever it is. For example, you're talking to the NPC and he takes out a knife and stabs the table. Well, that table with a knife, it now has some certain significance in the player's mind. So even subconsciously, like, it's not that that table was important, but if you said you remember the table that was stabbed, most likely they will, as long as it was something that's not common. So if you have each NPC stab a table, well, they will surely remember a campaign where each NPC had a vendetta against tables, but they won't remember the specific table. So you can add details like this, and I think they have to be interactions with the NPCs or with the characters themselves to actually be burnt in. But this is something that I for sure want to explore more. So yesterday I did a couple of polls in my community tab thing on YouTube, and I should have done it way back. I sensed that I want to research something that is tied to this imagery thing in the mind, but I didn't know what exactly. And then my friend and I sat down and we like worked with some ideas. So I made 2 polls that reflect like the initial question. From which perspective do players see things while they're talking to the NPC, for example? I had around 31 responses, and the majority said that they were seeing it from the first person. Then the runner-up to this, 29% of the votes was that they see it from like those RPG game perspective where you have the camera fixed from behind you and you're seeing your character from the third person, which is kind of interesting but expected. 19% said that they're seeing a side view, like they're someone else looking at the conversation from the street, for example. And only I think 6% said that they are looking top down, like from a map, which is something that I can't even conceive someone doing, but that's where the interesting part comes in, right? For the DM part, I asked the specific question of how do you visualize a scene you're describing that you don't have a map prepared for, like an improvised scene. And in between answers, it was shockingly close, like 30% said that they're seeing it from the player's point of view, from first person. And I have a thing where I think this is tied to how experienced you are playing the game or how many hours you have as a player. I think these variables influence this. An equal amount of people said that they are seeing it from the MMORPG point of view, from behind the player characters, and slightly over that number said that they are seeing it from the side view. And this is something that I usually do. I see the conversations from the side view or the MMO view, so this is why I started researching this thing. Like, you as a DM, you want to be close to the conversation, close to the players, so you can like notice things, almost like you're there with your like notebook and like checking if everything is okay, right? There is a small percentage of people looking from the top down, which was also interesting, but I really want to go deeper into this. I really wanted to see what affects this. Does initiative affect it? Does initiative change the perspective you're viewing the world from? How does age, experience in playing games affect this? How does sex affect this? I want to see, do people that haven't played video games while they were young still visualize it in the same way? Am I going too far? Absolutely, I'm totally going too far, but someone has to do it. It's the curiosity that drives research and new techniques and knowledge and understandings. And this is where you come in. In the description, there is a Google form, anonymous of course, and I would be very thankful if you can take 3 to 4 minutes out of your day and fill it in, share it with everyone that's playing TTRPGs, and let's get a decent sample going. And with that, I plan on going to a research psychology professor here on the university and try to interview him to help us understand what these results might mean, and then I will make a follow-up video going through the results and showing how we can
harness the power of the newly gained knowledge.
And I know some of you are probably thinking like, oh my god, why are you doing this? Just be a good DM, it's more of an art than it's a science. Well, no, I think all art is somewhat deeply coupled with science and our perception, and I think doing science is inherently expecting you to have some form of an artistic trait. And of course, you homebrew DMs, you're a different kind of breed, so I guess this might be interesting to some of you. And yeah, if you want to support this type of work, or this sounds interesting, or you want to see the follow-up video in your feed, consider subscribing. It really means a lot. It shows me that all of this makes sense. It is the wind into my back for making these videos. I'm still very thankful for all the feedback that I'm getting. Anyways, that's it for this video. I'm very excited for the results, and I'm very excited for the follow-up video. As always, keep on going, keep on loving, keep on being creative, play more D&D, and I will see you in the next one.
Farewell, keepers.